Welcome back, all you lovely people. Hope you had a nice little stretch there and are ready now to talk more about the deliberative utilitarianism of John Stuart Mill. I know this is exciting. Now, so far, I've only talked about what John Stuart Mill and Jeremy Bentham agree on. They're both utilitarians. They should be agreeing on something. And yes, Mill and Bentham, they are both consequentialists. They agree on consequentialism. Mill and Bentham are also both welfarists, so they agree on that. However, in the last video, I began talking about where the differences are going to start to appear, because initially Mill does sound a lot like a hedonist, just like Bentham, because Mill is talking about pleasure and the absence of pain as being so important. But we're now going to start seeing some differences emerge, because it's going to turn out that John Stuart Mill is not a hedonist, or at least he's not a hedonist like Jeremy Bentham. He's going to have some very important differences when it comes to what happiness actually involves. Yes, it sounds like hedonism, sounds like it's just about pleasure and absence of pain, but Mill's doing something very clever here. And I think we can start with this divergence by thinking back again to classical utilitarianism and Jeremy Bentham, and the idea that Bentham only thought that mattered when it came to pleasure and pain, the only thing that mattered was the amount of pleasure minus pain, the amount. So again, Bentham didn't care about the object of pleasure. Did not matter what gave you the pleasure. The only question was how much. So again, how much pleasure are you getting? Not from what are you getting the pleasure? He doesn't care about where the pleasure is coming from. He only cares about how much is being produced. So yeah, Bentham thinks all pleasures are equal. The only thing distinguishing pleasures is the quantity of pleasure, the quantity, not the, the quantity, the amount. I was getting ahead of myself. But maybe now you can guess where I'm going. And indeed, Jeremy Bentham has this really famous quote. A lot of people, philosophers, philosophers like this quote. People have no idea what Jeremy Bentham is. Anyway, so there's this famous quote amongst philosophers coming from Bentham. And here Bentham says, the game of pushpin is of equal value with the arts and sciences of music and poetry. Now, the pushpin, I had to Google this. It's an old game. I don't know, maybe the modern equivalent is like Cards Against Humanity. I don't know. Just a stupid game people like to play when they've had a few drinks. It's not very intellectual. It's just a little silly little thing people like to do for fun. Especially if you got some alcohol in your system. It's probably sober. It's probably not very fun. But what he's saying here is like a stupid drunken game is basically the same as something like poetry or music, something more, refined, shall we say, because Bentham was like, all these bougie people, poetry. Well, look, the people in the pub playing their games, their pleasures are just as good. So again, it doesn't matter what is giving you the pleasure, it's the amount of pleasure. So yeah, if poetry is boring, skip it, go play the stupid game, have a beer, enjoy yourself. If that gives you more, do it. I mean, look, nothing wrong with poetry. I'm sure there's some English majors. I'm sure poetry is good too. If you get pleasure, yeah, read the poetry. Anyway, but Bentham, who am I talking about? John Stuart, there's too many people. John Stuart Mill. He did not like this idea, because he thought that this leaves Bentham and classical utilitarian open to lots of criticism. For instance, if you look on page 186, jump to 186, here Mill is quickly summarizing a criticism made against Jeremy Bentham, because a lot of critics like to say that Bentham is presenting, quote, a doctrine worthy of swine. And this is kind of where Mill is then going to introduce his departure, because Mill does not want to have a doctrine worthy of swine. He wants to see happiness as something different from Bentham. And we can see, if we go back to page 186, go to 186 here, where we see John Stuart Mill say, these accusers of utilitarianism represent human nature in a degrading light, since the accusation supposes human beings to be capable of no pleasures except those of which swine are capable. And so the idea is this key nugget of Mill's deliberative utilitarianism, the move from classical to deliberative, is going to be this idea of a more enlightened notion of well-being, a more enlightened notion of happiness, a more enlightened notion of pleasure. Because he's going to want to say, Mill is going to really, really dwell on that, the idea that our human pleasures are different from those of other animals. If we were in a classroom, I'd draw on the whiteboard and think about what can we as humans find pleasure in that animals just cannot find pleasure in for whatever reason, because we are different from the other animals. We've talked about that before. But how does this allow us to have pleasures that animals can't have? Well, we'll kind of see at least what John Stuart Mill answers this if we jump to page 187, where Mill says, human beings have faculties more elevated than the animal appetites. And when once made conscious of them, we humans, do not regard anything as happiness, which does not include their gratification. Again, he cares about the gratification of the things, the faculties that make us human. So we get a distinction here between the faculties of humans versus the faculties of all animals. And so first, we get a division between these higher and lower faculties. Now, the higher faculties, these are the ones which are the distinctive ones of humans. These are the faculties that come from our sapience. Ooh, there's a big fancy pants word. And by the way, we are Homo sapien. So now you know where that word's coming from. Oh yeah, so yes, our higher faculties come from our sapience. And what's our sapience? Oh, our sapience refers to all these cool capacities that we humans have for intellect and insight, feelings and imagination that we have, being guided by morality, right and wrong. These are things we think and talk about. We have a sense of honor and experiences of great beauty. My cats, I love my cats, but I can see a sunset and go, that is beautiful. That is a beautiful sunset. My cats are like, what's he looking at? I don't see any food out there. I love my cats, though. No, but we have capacity for our sapience gives us, again, these great capacities. And indeed, these capacities of sapience might sound quite familiar because when we did the module on animals and morality, recall I had us to think about, what made us different from the other animals. And these things, intellect, appreciation of beauty, the ability to reason about morality and ethics. These are things we can do that animals cannot do. They distinguish us. And now I think Mill, and I'll have a quote here in a moment that I think fleshes out why I think this, but I'll just say it up front, is that I think when Mill, all these British dudes, David Hume was also British, another good guy. But anyway, John Stuart Mill, I think what he's thinking of when he's talking about our higher capacities, I think what he thinks, and they're not all just mental, right? They are about our emotions as well. But I think why he likes these or is thinking of these as high faculties is that they're about our abilities as humans, our capacity for reflective choice. We can choose what we do, how we want to live. And also it's about how we can implement our structured plans and our projects. We have plans about our lives. And for some of you, your plans are probably very structured. Okay, graduate in this many years, do this, and whatever, right? You all have plans. They're different plans, obviously, but you all have structured plans for at least the short term. Maybe it's just your plan, just get through this semester. I think that's all of our plan right now. But either way, our capacities of both mental and emotional give us this ability to control our lives, to make plans, to execute those plans, to change those plans if they're not going well or we change our minds. But we live structured lives as humans. We can plan, we can lead our lives, we have control over our lives. And Mill says, here, what he's really strongly arguing is that this is very valuable. Because I think you yourself realize the value it is for you to have these capacities to form, revise, assess, choose, and implement your set of plans, your own set of projects. Non-human animals can't do any of that. They're operating, they can't structure their lives the way we can. They're driven by desire and instinct, things like that. But our sapience gives us this whole bunch of capacities of intellect and emotion that allow us to structure and, again, form our projects, revise our projects, assess our projects, choose our projects, implement them. Oh, it's great to be a human. We can do this, right? And if you jump to page 188, you can see Mill talking about why we value our higher faculties. And I think this will kind of explain what I was just saying. So yeah, 188 about how we value our ability to plan and lead our own lives. Because on 188, he says, he kind of talks about we value our higher faculties because of pride, love of liberty and personal independence, love of power. And I think here he's speaking especially of the power to control our own lives, love of excitement, and a sense of dignity. And this is the important one, dignity, which all human beings possess in one form or another, and in some, though by no means exact proportion to their higher faculties, which is so an essential part of their happiness. Higher faculties, he's saying here, are an essential part of our happiness. It's not accidental. And so I'll come back to that in a moment. So he's contrasted now these higher faculties due to our sapience, but then we have the lower faculties, the faculties we share with all animals. These are the faculties that come from our sentience. We've talked a bit about this. Again, sentience includes these capacities for things like sensation, survival, eating, sleeping, procreation. Again, the things that all animals can do. We have those too, and these are our capacities based on desire and instinct. These capacities, though, are less about control of our lives. If anything, these desires and instincts control us when we have desires to eat, to procreate, or just survive, right? When to flee, to fight, whatever it is we need to do to survive. These are instinctual, and any psychologist will tell you, yeah, these are very deep into our brains and how they function. And now what Bentham is saying, though, and I alluded to this already, is that we get pleasure from all of this stuff. We get pleasure from exercising our higher capacities of thought and reason and emotion. But we also, of course, get pleasure from, eating and the lower faculties. But Mill, John Stuart Mill, is going to say the pleasures from the higher and lower faculties are different in some important ways. And indeed, if you look on page 187, you see Mill say that some kinds of pleasure are more desirable and valuable than others. And you can guess which ones he thinks are more valuable, more desirable. The pleasures that come from our higher faculties, he thinks, are the valuable ones. And so that's what Bentham means. Bentham, these two, they're similar. They're both utilitarians. Mill, John Stuart Mill says it's quality of our pleasures matters more than the mere quantity. Bentham, the guy we read a while back, Bentham is all about quantity, the amount. John Stuart Mill, he says, no, hon. It's about the quality of the pleasure. What's creating this pleasure? Some kinds of pleasure are better than others. Some have a better quality. And of course, again, he says, how do we judge the quality of a pleasure? How was it produced? If it came from a higher faculty, that's great. So yes, there are higher pleasures that only a human can experience, these higher pleasures, because these pleasures come from the development and exercise of our higher faculties of sapience. Those are the higher pleasures, the pleasures of intellect, of emotion, of beauty. These are pleasures that an animal cannot experience. And of course, there are the lower pleasures that all animals can experience, because these pleasures come from the exercise or use of the lower faculties of sentience. And so again, just to repeat, the idea is that our higher faculties of sapience, they give us all the capacity for higher pleasures, while our lower faculties of sentience give us our capacity for lower pleasures. But the higher pleasures are the ones that come from us being human. And so they have more value. Again, they have value because they're about us having control of our lives, being able to execute our life projects, having structured plans for how we're going to live. The pleasures we get from executing our plans or developing the capacities to even form our plans, that gives us pleasure. And so Mill disagrees with Bentham. There is something about poetry that makes it the pleasure you get from poetry different from, and of course superior to, the pleasures of a stupid game like Pushpin or whatever, right? Cards Against Humanity. Look, there is pleasure in Cards Against Humanity, but maybe if you play it very differently than how I've played it, maybe you can get higher pleasure. But I think that's a pretty low, crude pleasure from stupid games, drunken games. Poetry has us use our higher capacities, our higher faculties. That's what makes it the pleasure from it better. And so now we can start to putting this all together to see, because Mill has this idea. We don't see it here in his other works, though he brings this out more clearly, but that's okay. I'll bring it out for you. Mill really sees humans as progressive beings. Now, what does it mean to be a progressive being? It means that a progressive being, like a human, is capable of constantly developing its faculties, its higher faculties. And once those higher faculties are developed, we don't want to go back to what we were before. Again, Mill is interested in the happiness of a progressive being, about developing, exercising our higher faculties, and that we never want to go back once we have developed. That's the progression. And indeed, if you look on page 186, you see Mill say that a beast's pleasure do not satisfy a human being's conceptions of happiness. And if you jump ahead to 187, you see Mill also says that few human creatures would consent to being changed into any of the lower animals for a promise of the fullest allowances of a beast's pleasure. No intelligent human being would consent to be a fool. So again, he's going back to this idea is that we have these higher faculties, again, emotions, our minds, and we love to use them. It's hard. We struggle. Of course, you're in this class, but I'm trying to help you. I'm trying to develop those capacities, your cognitive and affective capacities for deliberating with others about issues in ethics. Yes, that is a higher human faculty. My cats do not have the cognitive and affective capacity to deliberate with others about morality. My cats don't sit around smoking cigarettes going, "Whoa, what do you think? Should we kill the humans and take over?" I don't know why my cats are French. Anyway, but we can, and we love using these. And suppose you could say, Professor Gray, I could turn you into a cat and you'd have all the pleasures a cat could ever have. I would still be like, I'd still miss out on what I have now. I would be sad to think that that's all I have. And so again, Mill says no one wants to retrograde or go back. We don't want to go back to where we were if we're being serious. I mean, look, maybe if Mill does say if things get really terrible, then maybe, like torture and stuff, maybe being a cat would be pretty awesome. But if you're living a pretty normal human life, that's pretty amazing because you're using your mind. You're making structured plans that animals can't do. Again, human life, development, growth is about going forward and not regressing or going backwards. And I think there's some cool ideas here where we can see these truly cool things that we do as humans. Because look, we all, I assume, have lower capacities and desires to procreate, right? You guys are college kids. You know what I'm talking about. And yes, in young people, this often appears as lust, as just a physical desire to satisfy. But as some of you, maybe all of you, have grown and developed your mind and your emotions, you have developed a capacity, I hope, for loving another person. And this is this human ability where we can take our lower faculties like desire to procreate and lust and transform it into something that is using our higher capacity like love. Because I think I definitely agree with this, and I bet those of you who have experienced true love know this as well, is that once you've had that taste of love, you would never want to give that up and go back. Love is so much more. And similarly, look, we all have lower capacities and desires to want to eat when we're hungry. And yeah, young people eat like slobs. It's okay, I eat like a slob too. But you can develop your mind and your social capacities, and you'll develop a higher capacity for, say, communal meals, where you get with others, yes, to eat and drink, but it's not really about the eating and drinking that's happening, but it's about conversation, being a community, talking about your day. That's why your parents, when you'd have dinner, would probably say, "What'd you do today?" We're trying to communicate, form our bonds of community. So yeah, a desire to eat can be transformed from just mere survival instinct to something greater, something about community. I mean, that's pretty wild. The breaking of bread, this concept that exists across many different cultures of breaking bread with others, seen as not just a thing about survival, but about symbolism of community that we can do. I'm getting goosebumps because I love this idea about how we can take our animal instincts and through things like poetry and community and all these other awesome things, we transform them into something powerful and uniquely human in a way that unfortunately other animals can't do. And by the way, I think this discussion of the power and importance of community is exercising our minds and our capacities, not just our mind, our heart, obviously. This, I think, might say also why, according to Mill, that egoist is so, remember the egoist is all miserable because the egoist only cares about themselves? Yeah, and Mill said that there was this idea that a selfish person lacks mental cultivation, because the idea is mental cultivation is developing not just your mind, but of course your heart, the humanness. And the egoist doesn't do that because the egoist is just selfish and only cares about themselves, whereas that greater happiness, that powerful happiness comes from caring about other people. And that, again, that's giving us a higher capacity of love and concern and friendship, sociality, whatever it is. It's awesome. I'm really excited about this. I think it's so cool. Any case, all this discussion of humans as progressive beings, I think, helps us explain and understand this very, very, again, philosophy famous quote from Mill. This is a quote that's on page 188, 188, where Mill says, "It is better to be a human being dissatisfied than a pig satisfied. Better to be Socrates dissatisfied than a fool satisfied." And yeah, look, Mill is recognizing that as humans, as beings with higher faculties, we are, and I think this is a quote somewhere in the reading, where he says we are capable of way more acute suffering than other, animals, because of our minds and our hearts allow us to suffer. But I think Mill says, it's totally worth it. The heartbreak you get after you break up with your first love, I know I've experienced that, but don't worry, you'll find someone even better. I did. I won the lottery. But it's totally worth it. That pain, that suffering you go through love or through friendship and all these other things, because the pleasures we get are so wonderful. And look, even if those pleasures are in short supply, we value every single drop of those pleasures. We just want to get even if it's a drop of love, that drop is pure and powerful and amazing, even if it comes with other kinds of pain. Now, if you jump to page 192, we can see more of this idea of us as progressive beings. When Mill is talking about having a cultivated mind, this is where Mill says, "A cultivated mind, I do not mean that of a philosopher, but any mind to which the fountains of knowledge have been opened and which has been taught in any tolerable degree to exercise its faculties, finds sources of inexhaustible interest in all that surrounds it, in the objects of nature." I love that. "The achievements of art, the imaginations of poetry, the incidents of history, the ways of mankind, past and present, and their prospects into the future." Yeah, Mill says by getting in it, that's why Mill loved universal education, because he said by opening up your mind for poetry, for science, for history, all these other arts, he says by learning a new subject, it's opening so much new type of pleasure that you never knew you could have, and that animals will never be able to experience besides us. And that's what I hope college does, is that at least you find one area that opens up your mind that you love. And you're like, I like learning about this. This is cool. I really hope you find that, because your life is going to just explode. As Mill says, you're never going to be bored. You're going to just be able to keep digging into that area, and just, it'll fill you up like nothing else. Again, that's through study. We've also seen how similarly the capacity for love can be enlarged. You never want to shrink this stuff down. I'm getting way too excited by all this. But it is worth noting in all these different areas that Mill is probably advocating a very pluralistic notion of happiness, a pluralistic notion. What do I mean by that? I think what I've just read, that little passage about mental cultivation, he was talking about all this different stuff. And I think it's impossible that any one person could develop each and every one of their higher faculties. We just have too many. I mean, maybe a few gifted people can be both awesome poets, awesome scientists, awesome mathematicians, awesome entrepreneurs, awesome philosophers, awesome everything, but that's pretty rare. Most of us are lucky if we can just develop one or two of those capacities. And so, but that does mean that's like flexibility. We're all going to have different plans of life, which higher faculties we're choosing to develop and exercise. So we can find pleasure in many different ways. And that's pretty cool too. He's not telling us there's only one right way to seek happiness. No, you can find the way that gives you meaning, that fits into your life, into your plan. And so, like I've said, John Stuart Mill, in going through all this, has been talking about the well-being and happiness of progressive beings, beings who can grow, beings who can develop, and beings that don't want to go back. We want to continue to grow as individuals and as societies too. And so I think all this comes together into what we can call then. So yes, Mill, this is not hedonism like Bentham. This isn't your granddad's hedonism. This isn't your godfather's hedonism. No, this is not classical utilitarianism anymore. Now you can start to see why this is deliberative utilitarianism, because John Stuart Mill has accepted what we can call eudaimonism. Eudaimonism, these words. Eudaimonism, this says that well-being is nothing other than happiness, understood as the pleasures that come from the cultivation and exercise of those higher order capacities distinguishing human beings from other animals. Whew. Good gosh. Good golly, Miss Molly. I know this video is one of my longer ones. And I mean, I want to apologize, but I'm kind of like hashtag sorry, not sorry, because the higher order pleasures I get from Mill are great. I mean, this is like refined heroin. I don't know what heroin is like. I'm just guessing. But it's like, I just love these ideas. There's so much to think about. And I really want to give you a sense of what I think are these great rewards, these higher pleasures that come from a careful reading of Mill. I mean, I've only given you like half the quotes I could have pulled out because John Stuart Mill is very quotable. I've had past students go and put quotes of his as their email signatures and stuff. I mean, like I said, he's the first really great ethical moral philosopher we've studied in this class in detail. So I like him. Anyway, after all that higher pleasure, I think we need a lower pleasure. And for me, that's Cheetos. For you, it's hopefully another snack of something good. So let's go take a break from all this higher pleasure and talk about and go enjoy it. We can indulge a moment of lower pleasure of snacking. And then we come back, we can talk about how we might model Mill's account of decision-making for this deliberative utilitarianism. All right, go get that snack. I'll see you back here in a moment.